Atheist Nomads, episode 387, Naturopathic Diaries with Britt Hermes.
The podcast you're about to listen to includes cursing and talking about hoo-haws. Please be advised.
Welcome to another episode of Atheist Nomads. I am Dustin, and in a little bit, I'll be joined by Britt Hermes. And for today's opening bit, I've got some news. I got the first dose of the Pfizer COVID vaccine, and it went really well. I would say this was probably the second most painful vaccine I've ever gotten. I think it was either Hep A or the typhoid fever one that I got when I was a teenager before going to Mexico for a mission trip was the most painful, and this one was pretty hurt. Like, I don't know if it was the administration or just the shot itself, but yeah, that needle had been out for quite a few seconds before I realized it was actually out, because that sharp pain was continuing and my arm hurt all day yesterday and still been hurting most of the day today. So recording this on Wednesday, the opening bit, and I got the shot on Tuesday. Now, one thing that's worth bringing up here with this is it's really important as this vaccine gets rolled out that when it's your turn, you get it. Nobody gets to pick when it's their turn. There is a strategy in place. Yes, there's definitely some issues with the rollout because Operation Warp Speed was supposed to get 20 million people vaccinated by New Year's. And yeah, we're at what, 2 or 3 million at this point? So yeah, they've definitely missed the mark there. So there have been issues with it. There have been issues with getting enough cold storage out where it's needed to store these. Like the Pfizer vaccine needs to be stored at minus 70 degrees. That is ridiculously cold. But it's important to think about this, that we've got this pandemic is still active. We've got new strains developing, and we need to get under control because we've got what's being estimated to be a really bad winter, the worst part of the pandemic over the next few months. And so when you look at the strategy that's being utilized, Priority Group 1A, people who work for hospitals. They went to people taking care of COVID patients first. They got the nursing homes and assisted living facilities and their staff and residents. You've got people who work in emergency rooms and urgent cares who get to see patients a lot. You've got the people who are doing COVID testing. You've got people who are handling potentially infectious material. And then you've got the support staff. So I was in Group 1A4. That one covers support staff who can work from home and don't have any direct or indirect patient contact. Everybody else who has direct patient or indirect patient contact was in higher priority groups. They got first dibs, and they still had openings, so they opened it up to everybody a week early. And yeah, this was week 4 at this point, actually. One of the things that's interesting to think about this, because there was a frequently asked question in my email at work, or somebody had asked about, I don't deal with patients directly and can work from home, so why am I getting it now? And the answer was, support staff at hospitals are needed for the doctors and nurses to be able to do their jobs. And like in the role I'm in, like I'm working on a project right now. I'm going to have to do some work Saturday morning of New Year's weekend to expand COVID testing here. I don't see patients. I don't directly deal with patients, but I do play a role that helps keep everything moving. And if you look at this first wave, it's keeping that first group was the doctors and nurses who deal with COVID patients, making sure that they can be less likely to get sick from their patients and be more likely to be able to keep going to work. Because if you look at the local hospitals here in the Treasure Valley, we've gotten close to, fortunately it still hasn't happened, of needing to go to crisis standards of care. And if you live in an area where that has happened, that sucks. But the biggest concern has been having enough staff to take care of the patients, because as staff gets sick, the capacity goes down. And so making sure that capacity is maintained is very important. And then keeping up the support staff and everybody else. Then you add in first responders, grocery store workers, the other people who have to deal with a lot of very essentially deal with the public during this pandemic to cut down on the spread as they might get it, be asymptomatic, and spread it in their contacts with everybody else. So that's also really important. And then really old people and then not as old people and then adults with pre-existing conditions that put them at higher risk. All of that part is reducing the strain on the hospitals, making sure that the hospitals can keep up with it, making sure the hospitals have the staff, slowing the spread a little bit. And actually, by the point you're getting to first responders and the grocery store workers and other essential workers, it's about making sure that the infrastructure can survive through this current wave or tsunami, as I'm starting to see it referred to as. And then you get to elderly people who are at the highest risk of needing to be hospitalized. Once they get vaccinated and get some immunity, then the pressure on the hospitals will be coming down. Yes, it will save lives, but the biggest thing with these early bits is strategically reducing the pressure, keeping the infrastructure that we need to get through the rest of the pandemic going. Yeah, if you're not in one of those groups, it's probably going to be 4 or 5 or even 6 months before you can get vaccinated. And that sucks. But we need to make sure the society can survive to that point. And when it's your turn, get the vaccine. If it's your turn, don't not get it because you don't think you deserve it. It's time for the interview. We are now joined by Britt Hermes from the... All right, so you are an American, but you're living in Germany now.
Right.
Yes. Doing graduate study in actual real things.
Actual real things. Yeah, so I'm doing my PhD in... technically, the field is evolutionary genomics, but what I do is I study the skin microbiome and the bacteria that live on us, and I look for sort of signatures of genetic co-adaptation. So look for reasons why a certain bug might live on us and another one might not, for example, just to make it super simple.
Okay. But before that, you were a naturopathic doctor.
Yeah, so I worked as a licensed naturopath in the U.S. in the state of Washington, and then a bit later in the state of Arizona. So in total for about 3 or 4 years. Okay.
So then what was, how did you end up going down that career path?
Right. So the short story is, and we can sort of delve into details as you want. So the short story is I was a teenager. I was diagnosed with psoriasis. I had a bad experience with a doctor, which is super common, especially for women. And the diagnosis was essentially, yes, you have psoriasis. This is a long, lifelong condition with essentially one treatment goal, which is to stop symptoms using steroids. And so I interpreted that as sort of suppression of the illness, suppression of the disease, which, fits in nicely to this alternative medicine rhetoric, which we can get into. But this was really the beginning of a long journey for me into thinking about how I can be healthier, air quotes, be healthier, not using medicine. And so what that meant for me was turning to things like non-science-based therapeutic diets, lots of supplements, stuff that's pulled out of traditional Chinese medicine. So some like acupuncture, acupressure. And so essentially I sought out anything and everything that was marketed as being alternative to medicine.
Well, and it is reasonable to, especially if you're 17 years old, you find out you have a chronic health condition that cannot be cured. That's not satisfying. Nobody at that age would ever want to have to be like, yeah, you're going to be on these horrible medications with side effects for the rest of your life to try to manage this condition. That sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, it super sucked. And I was really upset, as you said. I was definitely crying. My mom has psoriasis and other family members have psoriasis. So I sort of had this idea of what my future would look like, which was really inflamed, red, yucky looking skin patches and a lot of nasty medication. And I didn't want that. And I was convinced that I could do it a different way and do it a better way, frankly.
Okay. So instead of just suppressing the immune system because you have an autoimmune condition, try to tweak everything to do better in theory.
Yeah, so I took this approach of like everything but the kitchen sink. So I started taking all of these supplements. I changed my diet. I sought out lots of therapies and books that talked about alternative medicine. And while I was pursuing all of these things outside of medicine, I was also doing the steroids and the special shampoos and whatever prescriptions my doctor gave me. And my psoriasis improved. Mm-hmm. But in my mind, it was because of all of this extra lifestyle stuff I had done, and not because of the steroids and the special creams and all of the science-based medicine.
Okay, so that got you down. So then you had confirmation that the fake stuff works,
right?
And then based on that, you decided you wanted to be able to help other people, right?
Right. So I was studying psychology at San Diego State with this intention of going into a graduate program for psychology. I took a health psychology class, which introduced me to these ideas of motivational interviewing and helping patients make difficult lifestyle changes like smoking cessation, for example, or weight loss. And it was through researching these programs online for health psychology that I literally ran into programs for naturopathic medicine. And at the time, the language on the websites for these programs really were aimed for people like me, I think, where it talked about delivering a science-based education, a science-based curriculum where one could learn all of the stuff that medical students learn, plus all of these extra novel, super special therapies like homeopathy or botanical medicine or hydrotherapy and on and on.
Okay.
So I read that and I thought, well, that's perfect. I'll be a doctor. I will learn science. And I get to do all of this like cool lifestyle stuff, which I totally know from my own experience absolutely works. This was my thought process. And so I was going to get educated and then spread the word.
Okay. And then when you got to naturopathy school, was it like part of a traditional college, or was it its own like standalone school?
Yeah, so I went to Bastyr University outside of Seattle, which offers other degrees, but I can't say with certainty at this time point the scope of the degrees that were offered, but at least at the time, I recall they offered a PhD program in traditional Chinese medicine. There were master's programs in nutritional science, but definitely with a woo-woo edge. And so I don't remember the exact name or the jargon around that. There was a master's degree, I think, in like a botanical medicine. And I think there was an undergraduate degree, but it was like an undergraduate degree specifically designed to feed into the naturopathic, air quote, doctorate program. Okay. So I don't know. I don't know how rigorous those programs are, I guess you could say.
So a woo college.
Definitely a woo college. Yeah.
All right. And then, so when you got started, did the stuff you were learning trigger your bullshit detector, or did it all seem reasonable?
No, I was super excited about it, especially that first year, because I was really focused on the courses that had medical titles and were mostly real with sprinkles of BS. So like I was really focused on my anatomy class, for example, and my biochemistry course. And it wasn't really registering to me that my biochemistry course was being taught by a naturopath and maybe wasn't at the same rigor as a medical school course, because I didn't have anything to compare it to, for one. The class felt hard enough to seem like it was legitimate. And I am also being exposed to a lot of the pseudoscience that is taught in the naturopathic school for the first time. So I didn't know about homeopathy, for example, until I was already enrolled and, in the full swing of things at Bastyr. So this is the first time that I'm being exposed to these ideas and these concepts, and they're being presented as totally legit, and everyone around me is buying into it. So to question it, I would have been the odd person out for sure. And I wasn't looking to be the weirdo.
Okay. And so you got through it all and finished, graduated. You were a doctor of naturopathic medicine.
That's right. Yeah.
Was there any rigor to getting licensed in Washington?
There is a licensing board exam, and naturopaths like to say that this licensing exam makes them board certified. It absolutely does not. There's no such thing as a board certification in naturopathy. A licensing exam is set up by professionals in the field to sort of create some sort of like semblance of legitimacy, and as if the field is credible. But it's important to know, I think, that naturopaths, in order to get licensed, are tested not just on like real medical concepts, but also all of the woo-woo. Right. So it's now that I'm out and I'm looking back, no, the licensing exam is not stringent enough. It's not enough. Being taught or being tested on like which homeopathic remedy to use in an acute medical situation is definitely not right. That's not good. There's no excuse for that. But if you speak to an active naturopath who still is a full-fledged believer in what they do, they're going to roll that out as sort of proof that the profession is adequately regulated.
Right. Okay. And there is a move to get naturopaths licensed in more states.
Oh yeah, for sure. So it was just a few years ago, I think like in 2016 or 2017, the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians came out with a goal to have licensing in all 50 states. I think by 2025, I think was the original goal. So there's definitely a huge legislative push to earn this marker of legitimacy.
And they got that this year in Idaho.
Yeah. So that's a bummer because it had been appealed just some years ago, actually.
Yeah, and I had to look into that because of my day job. So the views expressed on this podcast do not necessarily represent the views of my employer. But that being said, there was some debate about naturopaths and whether or not they could order labs in Idaho, because the Idaho Board of Laboratories still has, on their frequently asked questions, naturopaths explicitly called out as not being able to order labs in Idaho. Except it also says that anybody licensed in any health-related field in the state of Idaho can. And starting this year, the Idaho Board of Medicine now has a board under it that is the Board of Naturopathic Medicine that is granting licenses.
Yeah, so this gets tricky. So in North America, naturopaths are regulated differently in every state or every province, right? And so there's these local jurisdictions and these local regulatory boards, or colleges as they're called in Canada, sort of set the rules for what's allowed and what's not allowed and what's the standard of care and whose standards, right? Medical standards or naturopathic standards. Right. And it gets really tricky really quick. And so I came out practicing in Washington and then later in Arizona, where the scope of practice is really broad, where I was allowed to get a national provider number, so an MPI, a prescription pad. I had a DEA number. I had these special numbers printed on them, and I was allowed to call myself a physician in both of those states, which made it really tricky, right, for any patient trying to discern, what my education was to differentiate me from any medical primary care physician. And so states like yours, where these things are still being hashed out, I think it's really important to get your voice in the mix and sort of highlight to lawmakers why language matters and so that a patient can make an informed decision about who they want ordering tests and running their blood work and sort of making these diagnostic decisions.
And is there any... Okay, so I guess one thing we haven't done yet is, can you define what naturopathy is?
Yeah, it's everything. So it's a very, very, very broad umbrella term where you can literally put anything under it. So you will find the naturopaths who want to be viewed as evidence and science-based, who will say that everything that's primary care medicine fits under the umbrella of naturopathy. I disagree with that, and we can get into that later. But it also fits everything that is alternative to medicine. So from the common alternatives, like, supplements, nutritional supplements, that aren't necessarily supported by evidence. So taking, massive amounts of vitamin C or zinc or whatever, to the total esoteric, like iridology, to crazy things that just feel like voodoo or, witch doctory stuff.
And so iridology, would that be irradiation?
No, I mean like looking at the iris and making diagnostic decisions based on what the person's iris looks like. So the colors and the specks and whatever you may see in the iris of the eye. Yeah, it's totally bizarre.
Okay,
yeah.
So all woo falls under naturopathy.
Literally all woo. So acupuncture, there's bloodletting classes. Bastyr has taught bloodletting classes that falls under the umbrella of naturopathy. You're going to find people who say that making diet recommendations falls under naturopathy, whether that's an evidence-based diet, so something that's being made to lower cholesterol, let's say, versus something that's totally crazy, like let's take you off all sugar and gluten and every nightshade plant and, totally crazy things as well. So if you can imagine it, it can probably fit under the umbrella of naturopathy.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, and then with it being that broad, then there's no limitations.
Well, this is where it gets tricky when you're talking about how to define the profession in for a jurisdiction, for example, for the scope of practice. And so on the one hand, the Professional Association of Naturopaths wants to differentiate themselves and sort of like carve out a professional niche within medicine to say that they are a specialized field of primary care physicians, and we are different and we are important and we need to be regulated differently and considered differently. But at the same time, they want all of the benefits and the prestige that comes with being a physician. So they also want to be able to bill insurance, for example. They want to be able to call themselves physicians. They want to be able to treat all primary care conditions. Some will even argue for wanting to work in hospitals and have, some inpatient hospital rights as well. And so the profession itself is divided, and I think you can see that when you look at the varied jurisdictions and what naturopaths are calling for legally or, pushing for legislatively across the US. And I think it also just sort of shows how varied the individuals are within the profession itself as well.
So how does that compare with like integrative or functional medicine?
Right. So integrative medicine, I think, comes more from the other direction. So this is all very like generalized, right? But I think integrative tends to be more real medical doctors, so MDs and DOs, if we're talking about the US, so people who have gone to real medical school and are licensed to practice, and then are pulling in alternative medicine concepts into their practice in order to reach a broader patient base, so probably for marketing purposes. So I kind of see these doctors as like the MD who then got a certificate in acupuncture, for example. And so maybe they're a pain specialist. So in addition to offering pain management options, they're also offering acupuncture services in their clinic, for example.
Okay. And from what I've seen, ordering anywhere from 20 to 30 lab orders on healthy patients.
Yeah.
So they can figure out what supplements do they make? Can they sell to people?
Yeah. So this is sort of the functional slant as well, where you're going to see these practitioners sort of offering a, I don't even know how to phrase it really, like a diagnostic solution. Like, as you said, we'll test you for everything. We'll see where your micro deficiencies are, and we'll come up with a tailored, personalized medical plan, which costs buku bucks to make you the healthiest version of you.
All right. So then those three really are all crazy, but kind of like on a scale of, or not necessarily a scale, but like they're all getting to the same endpoint from different directions.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to know. So naturopaths, I think by and large, believe in the woo-woo. Right? Because we, me being a former naturopath, spend so much time sort of like entrenched in the system of alternative medicine that I really think it's like a brainwashing program, and like you just come out so polished on the rhetoric and like selling the nonsense and just I know what to say as a naturopath. Like I live it, I breathe it, it's in me. The integrative and functional doctors, I don't know that they necessarily have that sort of like deep inside like belief system.
What I've seen on their websites when I've had to look at them,
yeah, maybe, but
basically that they are disillusioned with traditional standard medicine,
yeah,
and want to be able to treat the whole person,
yeah,
and view the alternative medicine stuff as the way to treat the whole person, and not just the condition.
Yeah, perhaps. I don't know because I don't mingle with them. But so I was just having this conversation with my neighbor who's an emergency room doctor, and he was telling me that there's a shortage of doctors in Germany. And he said it's not because Germany doesn't have enough people trained as physicians. They do, but people quickly leave the medical field because working within the medical system, at least in Germany, he said, is really rigorous and it's really hard. And the burnout rate is really high because these physicians feel like they can't really truly meet the needs of patients. So they find themselves being able to make the same amount of money or more money doing something slightly different, which is working outside of the tradition of the regular conventional medical system, whatever that may be. And I think the same is true in the US. I mean, we certainly know of the high burnout rates in the health profession, especially, after COVID. I think it's going to be a shit show, frankly, with these like massive burnout levels. Yeah. And you can make a lot of money really quickly outside of the conventional healthcare system. So without having to do these inpatient hospital hours, without having to be on call, because you're selling a non-FDA approved diagnostic test set, right? Which looks at whatever. It doesn't even matter what it looks like because it's all nonsense anyway. And then you can sell them supplements to match the test results that come directly out of your office at 100% markup, right? So it's hard for me to take the profit motivation out of that, especially knowing that in the US, there's just massive student loan debt coming out of medical school. Medical school is free in Germany. So that, I'm speculating here. I don't have any data to support this, but that could be one reason why you don't have as many medical doctors jumping on the woo-woo bandwagon here, perhaps.
Okay. All right. So getting back to the purely naturopathic side.
Yeah.
So when you started practice, what was that like?
So I started practice as a so-called naturopathic resident. I worked essentially half-time or 3/4 time for a set salary, a very low salary, in a naturopathic clinic that catered to wealthy white families, to be frank about it, who had health insurances that accepted naturopathic care as primary care. So I saw a lot of kids, a lot of colds. I did a lot of vaccines actually through the state vaccine program, but all of this was coupled with naturopathic stuff. So I had a whole routine of giving a vaccine and then giving a homeopathic remedy directly after that, for example, to eliminate the risk of an adverse vaccine reaction.
And where was this homeopathic antidote?
So we're taught this.
What made you think that would work?
Oh, because It just does. I mean, not the homeopathy works. I mean, selling this to the moms and the dad works. And we're taught this in school. So when I was taking my pediatrics course, for example, and learning about vaccines, we were also taught how to create alternative vaccine schedules. We read the Bob Sears vaccine book, which famously promotes alternative vaccine schedules and casts a lot of doubt on the vaccine science and makes one a bit fearful about what's in a vaccine and what it might do for you. We had assignments, for example, to research a vaccine, and the assignment was essentially to research controversies associated with the vaccine, not, for example, how the vaccine was developed or the science behind that or the lives it has saved since it's been implemented as a public health measure, but this other side, and that, so we were always coming from it as though conventional medicine is great, but it's not that great. And it has a lot of side effects. And the job of the naturopath is to mitigate all of those side effects and to decrease the risks and the harm associated with using conventional medicine. And so it's actually a brilliant marketing idea to say, like, yeah, we're vaccine friendly, and to participate with that state program and to do that. But then, not so much money, but you make more money by tripling the number of patient visits because you've spread out the vaccines over a massive amount of time. So only one vaccine at a time, for example, delaying vaccines by years in some cases, and then always pairing it with a homeopathic product, which is sugar. So it costs next to nothing, but you're charging $10 a dose. So, that's, it's a business. It's a business model.
Yeah. Cause like my daughter is, other than flu shots and when they get a pediatric COVID shot, she's done with vaccines until she starts elementary school. Because of recent measles outbreaks, they've bumped up the second dose of measles to as soon as possible, not waiting until elementary school. So she's had 2 MMRs. She ended up getting, because of anti-vaxxers and people delaying the vaccine schedule, she got put on an accelerated vaccine schedule and got like all of the early childhood ones literally in I think it was a 1-year time span. Every visit, every 3 months, there was 3 or 4 new shots.
When we traveled home from Germany to the US for the first time with my daughter, she was so it was November. So she was 5 months, and we had a conversation with our pediatrician about accelerating the vaccine schedule because we would be going to the US and her risk then of traveling across the US and just being in the US we were there for, I think, four-ish weeks. She was at a markedly increased risk of contracting these vaccine preventable diseases. And so we also underwent a slightly accelerated vaccine schedule simply because we were going to the US with her, which is crazy.
All right. Okay. So you had pediatric patients who I'm going to guess were all healthy kids from rich families.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, there were, hold on, I'm thinking about that. I did see some chronically ill patients, some kids, but I was like, I was the cherry on top of their medical care. I wasn't the main provider in that situation. They had legit medical providers, and then they would sort of see their, naturopath, the fancy naturopath on the side to, I don't know. So they felt like they were doing everything possible for the child, perhaps.
Okay. And how much of your practice there would you say was trying to sell useless crap to healthy people versus trying to sell useless crap to people who needed real medicine?
Yeah, I don't know if I can distinguish that, right? Because I really believed in what I was doing.
Right.
And I also wasn't, a lot of it is like cooking without a recipe, so like you see a patient, the patient has whatever nondescript viral symptoms. They want something supportive for the immune system, whatever that means, right? And so you're like, I don't know, today I like turmeric. How much turmeric? This much turmeric. And let's throw in a dash of vitamin C. And so maybe that antiviral supportive system was the regime for that week, but the next week it was a little bit different. And I don't think any of those things really worked, but in my mind, they did. And I don't know that I have a good sense of, I wasn't tracking any of this at the time, so looking back, everything that I sold was probably not needed, or most of what I sold was probably not needed, but I definitely did not have a sense at the time of oh, I have to sell more supplements this month because I need to, whatever, boost my paycheck. It was always just in my mind, somehow framed as being for the good of the community or the good of the patient.
Right. Well, and with that kind of a creative approach, that would be, if your goal is boost the immune system, then whatever you're reading up on as the latest thing that might boost the immune system,
right,
that'd be easy to believe that you are helping these people.
That's right. Yeah. And people like to think that somehow alternative medicine or naturopathy is sort of immune from big pharma, but there is big supplements. I mean, there's big subs. And so we were also frequently visited by representatives from these supplement companies who would come, bring lunch, free samples, try to schmooze us and do the whole thing. So it was also very much shaped by whichever supplement company perhaps was in that week and introduced a new, immune system support supplement, blah, 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 too. So there was a lot of that happening.
Okay. And then, all right, so you got through your residency, and then what happened?
So I was there for a little bit longer. I met a guy who eventually became my husband. I moved to Arizona to be with him, and I basically started looking to practice in Tucson, Arizona, and I joined a health practice down there, which had a very different flavor. So it was less primary care and more alternative woo-woo-ish. So lots of detox therapies and lots of people coming into the practice specifically because they wanted to be outside of the medical system. But I joined that practice hoping that I could establish a primary care type patient base. And that never really panned out because that just wasn't the market in Tucson, probably because of general income, I would say, from the patients. And even though I was allowed to call myself a physician and a primary care physician in Tucson, if I recall correctly, I don't think I was allowed to bill insurance for primary care services. Okay. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think I was allowed to, or there was more, it was harder to do so, perhaps. Right. So I found myself seeing a lot of patients who were healthy, but who wanted a very crazy detox program with saunas and enemas and crazy clay supplements. And I did a lot of intravenous therapies of high doses of vitamins, for example. And my boss there was treating patients with cancer. So I also found myself helping him administer naturopathic therapies for various types of cancer.
All right. And naturopathic cancer therapies would be, again, a very vague term.
A very vague term, and I think really ethically very ethically sketchy, I guess. So, yeah, a lot of different things are used. People use different herbs, of course. One of the most well-known herbal preparations for treating cancer is mistletoe, intravenously. High doses of vitamins are commonly used intravenously, but also orally. Very strict diets are commonly used. So these are very restrictive diets. So usually like a no sugar diet, but that no sugar diet is to the extreme. So perhaps not even certain carbohydrates, for example. Intravenous baking soda is used to treat cancer naturopathically. And the man that I was working for was using a product called Ukraine, which is a herbal preparation of a plant called chelidonium. And this was really, I found out later, problematic because this plant does have some anti-cancer properties. So it does have some like really powerful alkaloids that could have some chemotherapeutic effects. And so with that, it can also cause really serious side effects. So it can cause bone marrow toxicity and liver failure. And my boss at the time was importing this drug from Austria because the drug was not approved by the FDA to treat cancer or to treat anything else. And so this is like the point in my naturopathic career where when I realized that this drug was coming in overseas and that it was not FDA approved, and what that meant was what he was doing was perhaps federally illegal. So with real big time consequences. And on top of that, really potentially dangerous for the patients because of these associated side effects.
Right, because there are loopholes where you can get away with calling it not medicine in the right way to get away from the FDA because of all these weird legal loopholes.
Yeah.
Do those all go away when you start injecting it?
I don't know, actually. So I don't know what he told the patients specifically because I wasn't in that room with them when he explained it to them. I know that the patient had to pay for the medication in cash, and I know that it had to go. I know it went through a money wiring system that happened outside of the clinic. So that sounds sketchy. And I know that the manufacturer of the drug was arrested for charges of fraud associated with labeling and continuing to export expired product. So there was a lot of really bad things, associated with it. And I think one loophole is being part of a clinical trial. But to the best of my knowledge, there was no clinical trial happening in that clinic. And I was helping to administer that drug. So when I also became aware of all of this information and what being non-FDA approved meant, this was a very scary moment for me that sort of prompted me to rethink literally everything that I was doing and why I was even working as a naturopath in the first place.
Yeah, because that's a lot of red flags.
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of reading up on this before I, did anything, which included confronting my boss and reporting him to the attorney general and getting a lawyer and quitting and all of that and reporting him to the regulatory board. But there are cases of medical doctors importing and using this drug to treat patients, and those medical doctors serving jail time and, and getting in really serious trouble. So I knew it was potentially a really, really, really big problem.
Yeah, that really would be. Well, and like there's one product I know of because my mom uses it, Arnica Montana, sold on pharmacy shelves over the counter as Arnicare. When I looked into that, she was surprised it worked because it's labeled as homeopathic, but then you actually look at it and it's 1x or 10x was what it was labeled as. So it was a 1 in 10 dilution, which basically brings it to about the same strength as like over-the-counter cortisol cream. So it's just a lotion, pretty standard way you make a lotion. But by calling it homeopathic, they're able to get away with the fact that the active ingredient, which does have studies supporting its use, those studies also said you shouldn't use it because of the potential toxic side effects. And the U.S. doesn't allow its import because of the toxicity. But if it's homeopathic, then it theoretically doesn't have that, except in this case, it's not really homeopathic. It's just diluted. Right.
It just eschews all regulatory regulations because it's sort of operating outside of the FDA's purview on that. I know through this cosmetics and foods. I don't remember the name of the act, but this other act. Yeah, this is tricky because a lot of these products, and this is an over-the-counter pain medication that she uses it for topical. So you'll even find products with capsaicin in it, for example, or some other ingredients that do have some proven topical analgesic effects. But yeah, it's being marketed and sold as a quote unquote homeopathic product.
Yeah.
So it's getting away from all regulatory oversight, essentially.
All right.
I know it's scary.
So then this one that you were dealing with, though, was definitely something shady, something illegal going on. You contacted the Attorney General. What happened from there?
I don't know what happened in terms of the investigation, through the Attorney General. I also sent a complaint to the regulatory board in Arizona, who, in my opinion, did a really superficial, cursory investigation of the situation and sort of, in my opinion, twisted the truth to say that my boss had voluntarily stopped importing the product and has no more intentions of importing and using it. But I know, because I was there and I was talking with the patients, that actually the product had stopped arriving, even though patients had already paid for it. It just didn't show up in the mail one day. And that could be because that manufacturer of the drug had been arrested in Austria for these fraud charges that I mentioned. Or perhaps it didn't show up because the FDA confiscated it and sort of like took it out of the mail system. So I don't really know, but it seems not accurate to believe. It seems implausible to me to believe what the regulatory board reported, which was that it was a voluntarily, stopping of use. And then they punished him, but this punishment was just a letter of reprimand, which was tisk tisk, don't do it again. Yeah. And I think that was all. I quit the practice. And then a few months later, I decided to leave naturopathy altogether, in part because of this experience, because I wanted to know, for example, who else in the naturopathic community was using products like Ukraine or Ukraine itself. And there was too many for me to be comfortable with, frankly. And then I started to just understand things differently. And this sounds really silly and stupid and naive and perhaps even unbelievable, but like I didn't have a really strong understanding of what FDA approval meant, for example, because a lot of what naturopaths do is not approved by the FDA, right? We're using these homeopathic products, like you just said, who the whole like system operates outside of the FDA, basically.
Right. And so like an average layperson, you wouldn't know what FDA approval means because the average person in the US doesn't.
And you would think that someone that's receiving a so-called medical education would have some understanding of what that means. But naturopaths don't receive medical educations. And so they're not actually like really taught how that process works. And I didn't have a strong understanding of what that meant and why it was important that these standards are in place and that they are adhered to. And so I just began to sort of scrutinize what was happening in the profession, what I could just sort of broadly and coarsely categorize into FDA approved versus not FDA approved. And then to even like look more granularly and at the details of that. And then in the context of my education, in the context of what I have been told by teachers and mentors and people that I respected in the naturopathic profession, and really came to this terrible conclusion, or at least terrible for me at the time, that the vast majority of what naturopaths do, in my opinion, is unethical. And I didn't feel like I could do it. I didn't feel like I could show up every day and talk to a patient and be honest and to make decisions that were in the patient's best interest, because I didn't have a strong medical background. I didn't have sufficient medical training. I didn't actually know what was safe. I didn't actually know what was effective. And I didn't feel like I had any place calling myself a physician. It just didn't seem like the right thing to do anymore.
That must have been weird going through, like, one day you feel like you could confidently take care of a patient and the next you don't.
Yeah. Well, it was a little more slowly than that. I'd say maybe it happened over the course of 6 months. And it helped to have really kind people helping me through it. And so I read a great book by Edzard Ernst and Simon Singh called Trick or Treatment, which really did a nice job of breaking down various alternative therapies by chapter. So I could sort of thumb through the book and be like, okay, I can read about acupuncture today because I'm not really emotionally invested in acupuncture. So let me read that chapter and then sort of like digest that information. And then days later or weeks later, I could go to another chapter on like botanical medicine or botany and herbal stuff, for example, and then homeopathy. So I could take it really slow and in a piece by piece bit. I emailed Edzard Ernst and he was so kind and supportive. Just a lot of empathy expressed and sympathy expressed. And I emailed Jan Bellamy of Science-Based Medicine, who was also really kind and generous with her time and just generally supportive. So that helped. My husband was insanely supportive and didn't, blink or question this decision to walk away from this career that I had just spent lots of years and money investing in. Mm-hmm. I had professionals on board. I had a psychiatrist and a psychologist to sort of help me process this because it really was a grieving process. And I think I really did go through a lot of these stages of grief.
Yeah, like that doesn't sound all that different than somebody who was a pastor for 3 years and then called it quits. You find out that your career is bullshit, and what are you going to do with that?
Yeah, totally. And, there's a community around this. There's a lifestyle around this. Mm-hmm. There's an ideology around this. So there was a lot of emptiness and loneliness and fear and anxiety and confusion and just feeling really lost and not really knowing what to do.
Yeah. And so then how did you get by after that?
Well, that's where the blog started. So I started writing at naturopathicdiaries.com really as a way to sort of process what was happening. And there was a lot of sadness at first, and then you can see it when you look back through my blog posts. Anger. I was really angry. And God, I was so mad. And I still have moments of being angry, but not like I was, just really angry and feeling like I had been misled, wasted time, of course, feeling like I could have been spending that time becoming a real doctor, which would have been my real dream job, so that lost opportunity, and all of that. And so, I started writing to sort of process that and to sort of, I needed to do it publicly. I didn't feel like I could do it alone because I didn't actually really trust my own analytical skills anymore. I knew that left to my own devices, I chose the path of bullshit and pseudoscience. And so like doing it publicly and drawing in people who had been doing this for decades already. So the folks over at Science-Based Medicine, for example, and just sort of having these like giants, these pillars in the field to follow their beacons, so to speak, to help guide me through, and for them to say, you may want to check out this resource, or actually, I think actually you need to rethink that. That was a really helpful process for me.
All right. Wow. And then you decided to start a new career and got into a, sounds like a pretty cool graduate program.
Right. Well, I was very, very, very lucky because my fiance husband was accepted into a PhD program for archaeology in Germany. And so we were moving to Germany no matter what, regardless of what I was doing in the naturopathic profession. And so when it became clear that we were indeed moving to Germany and that indeed I did not want to be part of the naturopathic profession anymore, I realized that I had a sort of a golden opportunity on my hands because graduate school in Germany is free. So here I was, with no career and the opportunity to try to go back to school for free. And it just seemed like I should take advantage of that. So I just started researching master's programs, and I found a master's of science program that I think took a small gamble on me, and that I was able to convince that I would work my ass off in that program and to make it to really commit. And I even flew to Germany for the interview because I really wanted to show them that I was dedicated to re-educating myself in real science. And then that Master's of Science program led to a PhD opportunity. And we're still here in Germany for my husband's work. And so again, it just seemed like a great opportunity for me to try to reestablish myself as a real expert.
Nice. Well, and they say that I've heard quite a few times that when people leave religion, that they do best if they move at least 500 miles away. You left something pseudo-religion-y and moved more than 500 miles. And sounds like you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, I haven't heard that, but the distance did help for sure. Knowing that I wasn't going to run into anybody I went to school with, for example, after posting one of my angry or sad blog posts was helpful, that I could sort of put it out there and then know I could go grocery shopping and go about my day without, bumping into a naturopath. Felt good. I think it was good to have a fresh new start.
Yeah. And then you did get sued.
Yeah. It's a whole nother drama.
do you want to talk about that, or is it a
I can talk about it. I'll keep it relatively brief though. Because I've written about it in detail on my blog. So blah, blah, blah. Where do I even begin with this one? Okay. So I had found out essentially that different versions of my name were being bought up as domain names.
Ooh.
And some of these names were being redirected to naturopathic associations. So I think BrittMarieHermes.com, for example, I think went to the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians. And there was even a pretty janky looking website up at one of these domains that didn't have anything false about me, but it definitely created the impression that I was a proponent of naturopathic medicine. So in my opinion, it was all quite misleading and designed to, steer people away from my website. There was even Google ads being ran on my name. And so I had reason to believe that there was a naturopath in Arizona who seemed to be behind the purchasing of these domains and perhaps even that website itself. And so I started writing about this naturopath. Her name is Colleen Huber, and she treats cancer in her naturopathic practice using intravenous baking soda, for example, and super high doses of vitamin C and really strict diets. And her website really, I had never heard of her before this, I have to say. And I found her to be very striking because she reported really amazing remission rates that are so high that I thought, gosh, if this is true, this is pretty extraordinary. And this data should be explored. Yeah. So I just started to explore the data that she uploaded to her website herself. She has several research studies, in my opinion, dubious medical journals, that I think are designed to promote alternative therapies. And there's a whole host of other things. Like she had a naturopathic charity, or she does have a naturopathic charity, and that charity seemed to be associated with her clinic, and the two websites would cross-link to each other. So there was just a lot happening there. And I found this all to be fascinating, and I started writing about it. And she was very upset that I started writing about her and these remarkable cancer statistics that she was reporting. And in my writing, I suggested that she might be the owner of these domain names, and that she might be responsible for putting up this information, and that she also might be doing science wrong, that these figures might not be accurate. And in fact, if you look at this data a different way, which was done by an expert in looking at cancer data, the numbers actually look really bad for her. And actually, it looks like if you choose these alternative therapies, you have a higher risk of dying from cancer. So I wrote about all of this, and it pissed her off, and she sent me a cease and desist to take down the post, which I didn't do. And then she responded shortly thereafter with a lawsuit that was based in Germany. And I think she chose Germany because the law is more favorable for her in Germany compared to the United States. So I think it's harder to bring a defamation suit in the US. And in the US, one might have the opportunity to also file a motion in return as like an anti-SLAPP lawsuit, for example. So Germany doesn't have that option. And so it seemed more plaintiff friendly here. So the lawsuit went through the city where I lived at the time, which was in Kiel. It was a long case. I think she filed the suit in the fall of 2017, and it was over a year that it was finally decided. But when the court finally did rule, they found that I was that I had not committed defamation and that everything that I had written was protected under the German Constitution as free and legal speech. And if anyone listening wants to know the details and the nitty gritty and the back and forth of that, all of that is laid out on my website.
All right. Well, one thing I think would be kind of a fun one to go through is buzzwords that end up popping up, at least here in Boise, on new medical clinics that keep opening up. And I want your take as a former professional woo practitioner as to how wooey these terms, these buzzwords sound.
Okay.
The first one, wellness.
Like on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah, I'll say 1 to 10. 1 being it's perfectly reasonable, 10 being it's complete bullshit.
Wellness?
Yeah.
I think wellness alone, I'm going to put it a 5.
Okay. Beauty.
Oh, God.
Beauty in a medical clinic name.
Oh, in a medical clinic name. But this is tricky because there are so many like medical aesthetic practices.
Not a plastic surgeon.
Not a plastic surgeon. And remember, I come from Los Angeles.
Okay, maybe we'll do a pass on that one.
That one's hard. I'm just going to say 5.
Med spa.
Med spa. Yeah. Okay. 6.5.
Anti-aging.
Yeah. 7.5.
Oh man. Anything with life center.
Life center 9.
Anything with multiple buzzwords, such as
like
functional,
holistic,
holistic, life, wellness, health,
vitality center.
Yes, vitality. We have a couple of those.
Wee.
So if they get multiples, does it increase the score?
Yeah, it's compounded for sure. For sure. Vitality is such a woo-woo word in a medical setting. Yeah, I think center, I mean, of course, you can have a medical center, right? But like you throw in vitality center, wellness center, holistic center, even person-centered, it starts to feel really woo-woo-y. And I think your spidey senses should be tingling. I think you need to be cautious.
A doctor's name center.
A doctor's name center. I mean, be cautious. Right, because they're probably selling their own product line. So if it's not a line of supplements, which is really easy to create, it might be like a line of compounded pharmaceuticals. And so you have to think about the profit motivation there and what's really at the center of that doctor's care. Is it your well-being or is it their profit?
Okay, yeah. All right. So then, so if people are, let's say, looking for a new doctor as COVID comes to an end and life starts to return to normal, and perhaps your doctor died of COVID or resigned from all of the horrible overstress, so you need to find a new doctor. Avoid all those words.
This got dark really fast.
Right?
Yes, avoid all of those words. I mean, a good place to start, unless you're in a handful of states, is to look at who is in your insurance network, because I think it's only it's not so many states that will allow naturopaths to be covered as primary care physicians. If you are lucky and you live close to a university medical center, you can look at sort of the physicians that are associated with the medical centers. It's not a golden ticket, that this person is woo free, but I think there's a higher likelihood if this person is involved in medical research and is associated with a hospital that they're probably more likely to be conventional.
And most non-university hospitals also have some kind of a health alliance with independent physicians that work with them.
Yeah.
But they do have criteria as to who gets into that group.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah. You can also look at different board specialty websites. They probably have physician searches that you can make. And I think if you're, physician hunting, I think it's fair to ask that person, where they went to medical school and where they did their residency, and to look up that information. I know that so my parents are aging, and so when they go and are looking for new doctors and will share that information with me, I look those physicians up with, of course, just a basic Google search. But then I also look at the regulatory board in that state and see if anything comes up for that physician. I think those are all reasonable measures to take.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. Where can people find your blog?
Naturopathicdiaries.com.
All right. And anything else you want to plug?
Just Twitter from time to time. So I'm on Twitter at Naturo Diaries.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
And there is some feedback that I'll be saving for next week that we did get. So if you did send us something, don't worry, we'll get there. But the Interesting If True podcast did give us a shout out talking about some bits from this past week's Dusting Off the Degree. So that was pretty awesome. And Aaron, just so you know, the seal duckin', fruitcake, jello, and cannibal sandwich all sound super gross. The rest actually sounds fine, and I would eat it. If that doesn't make any sense to you, you'll need to listen to last week's episode of Interesting If True. Until next week, remember, not all those who wander are lost. Thank you for listening to another episode of Atheist Nomads. You can find show notes and contact information at atheistnomads.com. Follow us on Twitter at Atheist Nomads, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Atheist Nomads. Please subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or your podcatcher of choice, and while you're there, feel free to leave us a review. Theme music is courtesy of Sturdy Fred. Until next time, this has been the Atheist Nomads.